Okay, one thing that you may have to do in an emergency situation is retie a rotary valve, and that's something that just sort of happens at the least opportune time, and it's a good idea to be familiar with how to do it, and if you're not readily familiar, it might be a good thing to practice a few times. So we've got this this older king horn here that we're going to tie up. And, they actually do make jigs that hold all the levers steady and all this kind of thing that you can buy if you're into that. I've just always found that having them just laying on a flat surface is fine. And, but, it's a little bit unsteady, and so you might take something that you have, handy and just stick it someplace where it sort of stabilizes things a little bit and just makes it a little more steady. Now, when you're going to tie the valve, one thing you want to do first, you want to make sure that the lever works freely and that the valve works freely, because is that the reason why the valve string failed to start with? Maybe because there was something wrong that put a lot of extra stress on it. So if we're confident that everything is working, then we can go ahead and tie the valve. Now, for string, I use the Yamaha string for most instruments, and you can actually buy it in the lengths that are available at your local music store. And I buy it in a spool, which is actually quite expensive for string. But the main thing is you want to use a braided string. You don't want to use monofilament line or twisted string or anything of this nature. If you don't have the Yamaha stuff or something equivalent available, and a lot of horn players have their own special stuff they like to use, and but the basic parameters are it needs to be braided. It needs to have enough thickness to and not be too stretchy. If it's too thick, it's hard to get under the screws and so forth. And but if you don't have this available, you can go to a good store that sells fishing supplies and look at the braided fishing lines. Usually you're going to want to get something that's fairly a little larger diameter than a lot of them, because you don't want it slipping through the hole in the lever. And then just buy a few yards of it, or whatever you think is appropriate for a supply, and kind of go from there. But once you've got your cord, just like I say, a good braided cord, I don't like to really skimp on the length of it. I like to have enough to work with. You make a knot. Some people have special little knots that they make. Depending on the size of the string will kind of tell you. I usually just kind of do a couple of loops over and kind of end up with something sort of like a couple of half hitches, and that usually is fine for most things. And of course this is totally optional, but I always just like to melt the end of it a bit just to keep it from fraying. Makes it a little bit neater. Okay. Now, if you look at your other valves that are tied here, there's resting. As long as you've got it kind of on the same plane, you can see where the stop arm kind of needs to be in order for things to line up. Because if you do it here or here, you're going to be out of adjustment when you finish tying the valve. But you can certainly easily adjust it. Put it through and make sure that the knot is good and tight. Come up over, and then you want to come back through and over, so that the loop coming back around the valve is actually underneath, and that just helps keep things in place. Now here you've got a choice. You can either go over the string or you can go under the string, and it basically depends on the horn that you're doing. These older kings always wanted to be under the string, and the older cons always wanted to be over. Now the horns that now have the hinged lever here, which I think is pretty nice, usually I go under on those. But basically, when you get done, or when you get it in place, you can see if during the travel of the valve the string is rubbing, on itself, then you probably need to go the other direction. You basically don't want the rubbing of the string, which will cause wear over time. Now, bring it through there, and then when you go to this string, again, you want to loop it in such a way so that when you tighten that screw, it tightens the string. Because the screw is going to be tightened this way, and then as you tighten that screw, it tightens the string. Otherwise, if you do it the other way, as you tighten the screw, the tension will actually be loosened on the string. And then, everybody has their favorite way of doing it, but I generally just get it in place. Then I will tighten down the rotor screw. And then, since we're tightening things, if you get it too tight, the valve won't work well. So I generally put just a hair's worth of pressure on the lever to hold it out, so that as we tighten it down, then it ends up being too tight. And if it's sluggish or it won't go through the entire range of motion, then you might need to just loosen this up a little bit and create a little bit more slack there. Now then you have to look here, and we can see, well, we're not quite where we need to be in terms of the adjustment. So we loosen this center one just a bit. And that puts us in pretty good stead there. And I try to avoid bending the levers, whenever possible, although often you have instruments where the levers have been bent prior, during prior repairs. Instead of adjusting the string, they bend the levers to match, and so sometimes I just try to make the levers have a consistent pattern. You have a little bit of variation in terms of where these can be in terms of the individual comfort of the player, but some horns, of course, you have more restrictions because of the tubing. There's actually, on some horns, there's quite a narrow range that the levers can operate in, so you just have to figure out where that is. But, as you can see on this horn, the levers work without crossing over each other or without rubbing the string, whereas if you put the string on the top, you would be rubbing over that. So that's kind of what you have to consider. And then, just for the sake of neatness, we're going to cut it off a little bit, and I like to leave enough where there would be at least the potential to retie it if you had to at some point in the future, but it's not going to get in the way of things. And then just a little bit of heat to keep it from fraying, because that way, if you had to retie it, you could potentially come in maybe with just a razor blade and snip that off, and then have enough left to work with. The fourth valves are often a little bit different, and tying a rotor on a trombone is a little different just because of the physical location of the rotors. Sometimes they're a little more difficult to handle, but you just have to look at the individual situation and kind of see how to do it. And some horns have the levers that come on different sides of different valves, and when you do that, things are kind of backwards, and it's a little bit awkward sometimes, so you have to really kind of think about what you're doing. But other than that, you just want to make sure you get things snug, and operate the valve a little bit, and then make sure that your strings are still in good adjustment, and you should be good to go.